afternoon, everyone. First, I'd like to start by thanking our team of law enforcement partners who are up here on the stage with me today. They all worked very hard to ensure that Tyshawn's life did not end in vain. So joining me here today, just a few people I'd like to introduce are Cook County State's Attorney Anita Alvarez, from the Cook County Sheriff's Department, Chief of Corrections and Investigations Brad Curry, First Assistant Executive Director of the Cook County Jail Daniel Morrissey, and from the Chicago FBI Field Office, Assistant Special Agent in Charge Larry Lapp, as well as on stage are members, key personnel members who had active roles in this investigation. I'd also like to acknowledge and thank Congressman Bobby Rush for being here with us this afternoon. With the full weight of the Chicago Police Department, Cook County, and the FBI, this team stopped at nothing to bring justice to Tyshawn Lee. And we will continue to do the same for those who have been victims of senseless gun violence and gang activity. As you all know, I've said before, Chicago's neighborhoods, unfortunately, are feeling the effect of gang violence, the availability of illegal guns, and policies that are far too lenient on gun offenders. The murder of Tyshawn Lee, however, was something far more sinister. This was a targeted assassination by Dwight Doty, Kevin Edwards, and Corey Morgan. These are calculated killers whose actions define the words brutality and cowardice. Tyshawn was targeted and brutally killed in an alley because his father, Pierre Stokes, was a ranking member of a rival gang. His death was the culmination of gang violence that spiraled into a cycle of retaliatory violence fueled by illegal guns and absolutely zero regard for human life. Tyshawn was an innocent child betrayed by these three men, and sadly, he paid the ultimate price for gang violence, senseless gang violence, that plagued his neighborhood. Members of law enforcement often witness situations that no one should in their lifetime, and this case stands out front and center. In nearly 30 years of policing, I have never witnessed such a hateful act of treachery and savageness towards an innocent child whose life barely had the chance to flourish. While no conviction will ever bring back Tyshawn, we hope this development will bring some level of closure to his family and friends. State's Attorney Anita Alvarez will now outline some specifics of this case.
Thank you, Superintendent, Acting Superintendent Escalante, and the Chicago Police Department, and all of the law enforcement agencies represented here today, including the Cook County Sheriff's Office and the FBI. As you know, a second defendant has been charged with the murder of Tyshawn Lee. This defendant, Dwight Boone Doty, also known just as Doty, has been charged with the murder of Breonna Jenkins and the attempted murder of Deshari Bowens. A short time ago, my office proffered the following facts about this case, and I will read them to you now. Breonna Jenkins and Tyshawn Lee's deaths are the result of a gang war between a faction of the Black Peace Stones and the Kiloward faction of the Gangster Disciples. There has been a history between the two gangs for a long period of time, but it came to a head as a result of the shooting that occurred last fall on October 13th, 2015. In that shooting, Tracy Morgan was shot and killed while he was in a car with his mother, who was also shot and wounded. Tracy Morgan is the brother of co-defendant Corey Morgan, who has also been charged with Tyshawn's murder. Shortly after the shooting, Corey Morgan stated that since his brother was killed and his mother had been shot, he was going to kill grandmas, mothers, and children. Morgan, Doty, and another uncharged co-defendant were all members of the Black Peace Stones, and they began going out daily, armed with guns looking to retaliate. At one point, Doty set up a surveillance of Tyshawn's grandmother so he could kill her in order to draw out rival gang members. He also stated that his original plan was to torture this child by kidnapping and cutting off his fingers and his ears. On October 18th, 2015, Brianna Jenkins and Deshari Bowens were seated in a car in the area of 78th and Honorary. Believing that Bowens was a rival gang member, Doty is alleged to have walked up to the vehicle and fired multiple shots into the car, striking and killing Brianna and also striking Deshari. Doty later stated that he did not even know who was in the car, but when he and an uncharged co-defendant drove by the car, he saw dreadlocks on Deshari and believed that he was a rival gang member. Doty later stated that after killing Brianna and shooting Deshari, that he reloaded the gun and carried it around. He was later arrested by Chicago police while in possession of multiple guns and charged with possession of those guns. The guns were tested by the crime lab, and one was found to be the murder weapon in the case of Brianna Jenkins and the shooting of Deshari Bowens. On November 2nd, 2015, Doty and the same two co-defendants were seeking further gang retaliation when they arrived at Dawes Park at 80th and Damon. They eventually saw 9-year-old Tyshawn Lee, who was in the play lot at the park. Tyshawn had gone to the swing set his basketball down, and was playing on the swings. Morgan and the third defendant left the play lot and drove away in an SUV, and Doty stayed behind in the playground area. Doty then picked up Tyshawn's basketball and began dribbling it a few times before giving it back to Tyshawn. He then asked the child if he wanted to go to the store. When Tyshawn said he didn't have any money, Doty told him he would buy him whatever he wanted. Tyshawn and Doty were then seen walking off together out of the park and into a nearby alley. Once they reached the middle of the alley, Doty took out a gun and shot Tyshawn multiple times at close range. This defendant was facing the child when he shot him. He later made statements that he had, and I quote, "Seen that bitch go in his head. And Shorty, he was like he couldn't take it no more. Shorty couldn't take it no more," unquote. This defendant also later stated that after he murdered Tyshawn, he wanted to go back to the park and shoot it up. The police, unfortunately, the police were already there, and he couldn't go back, and he should have killed all the kids in the park. After the murder, the three defendants are alleged to have gone to a Walmart where they purchased bleach and proceeded to wipe down the inside and outside of the vehicle before taking the vehicle to a location where they abandoned it. This defendant also stated that he had been working on a rap song in which he talks about his killing of Tyshawn Lee. As you know, I have been a prosecutor here in Chicago for nearly 30 years, and I have tried hundreds of cases involving senseless gang violence and gang-related homicides on the streets of Chicago that involved unspeakable acts of rage and violence. But I must tell you today, I don't think I have ever been more disgusted and appalled by such inhumanity. This intentional murder of Tyshawn Lee is among the worst that I have ever seen in my almost 30 years as a prosecutor. When we have predators running around on our streets, pledging to kill grandmas and mothers and children for nothing more than senseless gang retaliation, we have an unprecedented crisis on our hands. Today's charges are a very important step in working to bring justice for this innocent little boy, and our investigation continues as we speak here today. So I want to thank again the Chicago Police Department for their tireless work on this investigation, as well as the Cook County Sheriff's Office and the FBI. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Gene Roy, Chief of Detectives with Chicago Police Department. First of all, I'd like to thank the State's Attorney for her comments. What happened to Tyshawn is reprehensible. And as we just heard from the State's Attorney, Mr. Doty was an engine of violence on a killing spree with absolutely no sense of humanity. He represents what is wrong with our criminal justice system, a convicted gun offender out on the streets to kill again. We can't keep letting this broken system tear our communities and families apart. Our unwavering promise to the people of Chicago is that we will continue to hold gang members accountable time and time again. As both the superintendent and the state's attorney said, I sincerely hope that this provides some level of closure for Tyshawn's family. I'd also like to take a moment to thank the joint investigative team in this case who treated this investigation as if Tyshawn was a member of their own family. Specifically, the state's attorney and her team of gang prosecutors who helped put the case together. I'd like to especially acknowledge the lead detectives on the case, Tim Murphy and Dan Stover, along with the other detectives from Area South Detective Division who worked tirelessly on this case. There's also the Cook County Sheriff's Executive Director, Dan Marisi, and his staff, and the FBI, specifically Special Agent Tony Grubasic. Chicago Police detectives have partnered with sheriff's deputies and federal agents to send a clear message that we will not let gang activity tear apart families in Chicago. Lastly, I would also like to thank Father Michael Flager, who since the onset of this horrific crime has worked to build bridges between police and the affected community in order to bring Tyshawn's killers to justice. Thank you.
We take a few questions now. We're not going to get into the specifics right now as to how some of those statements were obtained, but they will come out as the trial proceeds. And as you heard, this was an investigation that began back in October. The people up here put a lot of hard work and effort into this, and as more information can be released, it will be, but obviously you can expect to hear more at trial. Well, what I can say is we have a lot of investigations still ongoing. Just because we have some charges today doesn't mean that we've ruled anything else out. And so there are still open investigations that we're looking at to see how they may have been connected to the violence that occurred and ultimately ended in the death of Tyshawn Lee.
Was Tyshawn's father?
Again, right now, the best I can tell you is we have several open investigations that we know are still related to this conflict, and we're doing everything we can to close the loop on those investigations, and hopefully at some point we can give you some updates on additional charges. But right now, there's still other open investigations that we're working.
Was it the same gun?
I'll let Chief Roy, if he can, answer that.
No, the weapon used to kill Breonna Jenkins is not the weapon used to kill Tyshawn.
You know, we always seek help from the community, and sometimes it's a struggle. There are some community members that fear retaliation from the gangs, and obviously we have to accept and acknowledge that there are some community members that don't have the trust in the police that we would like to have. So in this particular case, obviously this was a city that was outraged by this senseless violence. There were a lot of community people that stepped forward that helped the investigation. But again, we can't get into too many more specifics right now. It'll play out as the trial begins.
Superintendent.
Her companion at the time was the intended target, not her. After some initial reluctance, he did talk to our detectives, and the investigation progressed from there.
What was your biggest
biggest challenge was, first of all, tying together a real complex scene. There were a number of, actually, 2 different crime scenes. There's evidence at both scenes. Going from there, locating, identifying witnesses, working on some of the technological aspects of the case. But most importantly, it was a challenge, but it was a challenge that was successfully overcome by this team of detectives and agents here. They gained the trust and respect of the community and were able to get certain key elements of information, which again we can't go into, that helped crack this case.
Well, you know what, I'm very encouraged by what we've seen over the last couple of weeks from this department. The work that these detectives and investigators from our partner agencies put together, this is what goes on every day. And as you're all aware, we have routinely released press statements regarding charging on other murder offenders or shooting offenders. The activity from the officers in the street, I've been very encouraged literally the last 3 weeks. We've seen some very good activity. I think that's attributed to a lot of things: better training, better supervision. We have 100 new sergeants that hit the street in February. We have 36 new lieutenants that hit the street Sunday. Officers are becoming familiar with the stop report and the revised stop report that went into effect last week. Yeah, we struggle at the beginning of the year, but I do think we're beginning to make a positive turn in the right direction as far as the actions that officers in the street are taking, as well as ongoing investigations that detectives and investigators are not going to let up in solving these open murders and shootings.
Mr. Edwards is the subject of an arrest warrant, and our fugitive apprehension unit is working in conjunction with our federal partners, including the FBI and the U.S. Marshal Service, to locate him. And as long as I'm here, I'd like to take the opportunity, since you asked the question, I'd like to ask him to do the right thing and turn himself in. We're working on a number of leads.
We appreciated the help of all our partners that were up here, but I think, as I mentioned earlier, we can't get into too many of the specifics right now, but it will unfold, and all that information will come out as the trial progresses.
Superintendent.
We have, in this neighborhood, since the murder occurred, we've tried to be more visible. And Deputy Chief Fred Waller and the Commander Bossett, have basically had the full support of the department, putting as many additional resources that we can there on a regular basis. And just because we've got this latest development, the charges announced today, we are not letting up on those 2 gangs that ultimately were responsible for the death of Tyshawn Lee. They're going to see us out there, they're going to feel our presence out there, and the community will see us out there.
Is there video?
Again, it's kind of a technical question. It's one that if we could give you more details, we would, but it's information that will come out in the near future, especially as the trials begin and progress.
Will you confirm?
No, I can't confirm that. Again, this was an investigation that has gone on for months, a lot of good work by all the people up here on the stage and other people that aren't up on the stage. All that information as far as how the investigation resulted in the charges will come out during trial.